Hello CFI and future CFI. My name is Priya. Welcome to my videos. I mentioned earlier the reason I'm making this video because when I was making my lesson plan for fundamentals of instructions, I couldn't find many videos where I could take inspiration to read the aviation instructor handbook. I don't come from psychological background, and just opening the book without having a basic idea was a little overwhelming for me. But it took me a lot of time. I'm making this video so somebody out there can take inspiration from my video, have general idea, but still go ahead and read the book, which is really good. So let's get started. Today we are making the lesson for Fundamentals of Instruction, Task D, Assessment and Critic. So the objective of today's lesson that the CFI candidate should be aware about the basic elements related to assessment and critic as described in PTS and the Aviation Instruction Handbook. As an instructor, why we need to do assessment? Why we need to criticize? Number one is that gives us a chance to know where the student is, how he is progressing. Also, it helps us to know if our instruction method is effective. When we give feedback after assessment to student will also know how well he is doing. That will motivate him, that will keep him on track and keep him informed where how he is progressing. So how do you do assessment? FA says there are effective ways to do assessment. Number one, to assessment to be effective is it should have objective. Well, objective means when we assess student, it should just assess the skill of the student. We should not put our personal opinion, like, dislike, our favorable attitudes or sympathy to the assessment. You should just see as it comes and then assess the student. So for assessment to be effective, we should have objectivity. Number two, it should have flexibility. What flexible means is when a student is performing, you should be careful because the student, a good student can perform poorly, or a poor student can be extremely cooperative. So depending on the situation, maybe winds, crosswind, gusty wind, or just the attitude of the student. So as an instructor, when you're assessing, we should change the way we take assessment as per the need of the student, at the need of the circumstances. Because every student is different, every day it can be different. So the way you approach and the way you take assessment should be flexible. Then only it will be effective. Third one, it should be acceptable. It means when we are assessing a student, students should accept the assessment. A student should have faith in your assessment. He should have faith in your ability, sincerity, your knowledge, and your ability to do the assessment. And you're just not there to degrade or judge the student, but to help him. So he should accept your assessment before you give the assessment. Then the fourth one, it should be comprehensive. I'm sorry if I make any mistakes in spelling. Comprehensive means it should test his weaknesses and strengths. It should cover all the areas of the skills, not just particular areas, because when you're just trying to give the feedback on his weaknesses, then he would have this question that what did I do, how did I do in other areas, and that might demotivate student. So it should be comprehensive. It shouldn't have to be lengthy, but it should cover all the areas of the skill, minors and major areas too. Also, and then it should be organized. Organized means as an instructor, you should be quick enough to assess at the right time. You can start assessing when the student make mistake and go backwards to tell student where exactly he made mistake. Or you can also make assessment in parts where you can assess different part of the skill and then make one assessment, or you can take the whole assessment and make in parts, put all parts together. So as an instructor, you should be able to organize the assessment. Also, assessment should be specific. When you're assisting the student, you should not, after assessment, you should not just say, oh, well, your landings are fine. That doesn't say anything. That doesn't help. So you should take, okay, you maintained altitude on downwind. You did your pre-manual checklist, pre-landing checklist. You were, but on final, instead of being 65, you were 70. So try to be on 65, maintain your airspeed. That will give him clear picture where exactly he's making mistake and where he's doing fine. So there would not be any confusion. The last one, it should be thoughtful. We need to remember that students have feelings. All humans have feelings. So when you're criticizing or assisting student, you want to be straightforward when you're giving any weaknesses. But you need to make sure that you're not using words or your power to make student feel bad and not worry how he's feeling, or do not criticize him in public if he is not comfortable. So make sure you don't hurt student, and be thoughtful about your assessment. Don't misuse the power. So that's it. So the effective assessment should have objective, should be flexible, should be acceptable, should be comprehensive. It should be organized. It should be specific, and it should be thoughtful. So there are types of assessment. One is a traditional assessment. What is traditional assessment is basically we all have taken, it's a written test. Traditional assessment have questions like fill in the blank, match the following, select from the list. So traditional assessment, we can, as instructor, we can give it to student, to one student or many student. It should be able to test the general knowledge of the student, but it has its own limitation. We cannot test the higher order thinking skill or the scenario based training or knowledge or aeronautical decision making skill on traditional assessment. No. But yes, we can use it like we take the pre-solo written test. So tests like that, just to know the basic knowledge. So how do you make traditional assessment effective? The traditional assessment, FA said, should be reliable. Reliable means if you give this test to one student or to many students, it should be effective. Okay, should be reliable. It should test the same thing. Then it should have a validity. Validity means the traditional assessment, when you try to, it should test what it's supposed to test. It should, if you're trying to test the navigational skill of the student, and if you give them a question about radio communication, that's not going to help. So it should be able to test what you're supposed to test. The question should make sense. If you need help, we can ask the other instructors to read your assessment to get their opinion that it makes sense. Third thing, the written or traditional assessment should be usable. Usable means it should be printable if you need to print it. And if you're printing it, it should be readable, the font should be clear, the color of the page, the images should be clear, the graphs should be clear and readable. So it should be usable. Another thing, it should have objectivity. Objectivity is, as an instructor, we know how to teach, to explain. But as student, he might have some problem explaining us back, and there might be a miscommunication, misunderstanding about the skill he knows. So in order to avoid a grammar mistake or just a miscommunication, we can just give them a concrete varieties of answer, and then he can select which answer is right. to avoid miscommunication. Then it should be comprehensive. I think I mentioned comprehensive is it should be able to test all areas, strength, weakness, major and minor points. Then it should have a discrimination. Discrimination means here it means that if you just give student a test which is really easy and all students score 100, that will not give you an opportunity to test the depth of his knowledge. So you should have all levels of difficulty, you should have some necessary questions which are easy or difficult, whatever the questions are, necessary question, but you should also add some difficult question which challenge their thinking. And so what will happen is you will be able to distinguish between knowledge of different students, how well they understand and what areas you need to work on, since you are giving them all levels of difficulty, and also you know the depth of the students' understanding. Okay, so that was your traditional assessments point, the reliability, validity, usability, comprehensive, objectivity, and discrimination. Then we have authentic assessment. What is authentic assessment is basically it's real world scenario. Okay, it's real. You make a situation like it can happen, and how do you test the authentic assessment? We can test in many ways. We can give them collaborative assessment. Collaborative assessment is you and your student assessed. How do you do that? Is you ask student series of questions after or open-ended question after you do the task or maneuver. So the way you ask the question, FA says you ask them to replay. Replay means the student will, you ask the student that, sorry. You ask the student that tell all this step what we performed today verbally. So when the student is telling you the steps, you have an opportunity to correct him or understand, hey, he doesn't have that concept clear. So by just telling verbally, you have more chance to observe, and student also know and have time to think, not concentration on playing, but we are assessing, so he can verbally tell you what steps are there. Then you ask him to reconstruct. So you can ask student so you perform this task, what you think this one thing you have done differently. So as a student, he will have this knowledge and his memory, he would think that, I wanted to do that, but I couldn't do this for some reason. And I think if I need to do this, I'll be better. So you motivate and you also figure out he knows it or he has a different opinion. Then ask student to reflect. Reflect means perception. When you put all the perception together, insight happen. So here is the opportunity for you. Just after the maneuvers, you ask student to go to remember the whole experience and ask student what was the one thing was challenging for you, what made you uncomfortable, what was the easiest thing you did today. So when he go through the experience and then you and him together, you can analyze and you can also take a lot of clues and information what's going on his head. Then we can redirect. Redirect means you perform today's assessment to some others, like whatever we did yesterday, how it is similar to today, or whatever you have learned today, how can it help you to do the other maneuver again tomorrow? Would it help? So student will say yes. Like since we did S turn, now students will say, we did S turns today, but I know how the winds affect your rate of turns, or so that will help me to do a perfect traffic pattern next time. So we redirect. So again, the collaborative assessment, the effective question would be replay, reconstruct, reflect, and redirect. Okay, and there's another assessment called oral assessment. It's similar, but here we ask series of clear, direct and indirect questions just after the task. So the memories are fresh. He can also think and um, uh, um, he and we can take information from the student to assess whether he's doing right or wrong. So in order to do oral assessment, we should ask right and clear question. The answer should have just have one clear answer, or unless it's scenario based, saying that it will have open-ended answer. There's not the right answer. Um, but when you ask a question, you should not ask that, how was it? Did you learn anything? Do you have any question? So you should not ask just yes or no question, because that's not effective. Also, you should not ask question like some question which is going to puzzle student, or should not ask lengthy oversized question, because student will get lost. You should not ask toss up question, that means 50-50 question. It means in the emergency situation of engine failure, would you squawk 7700, or would you choose a lightning spot? So that's not going to give you an outcome. You should not ask bewilderment question. Bewilderment means confusing question. So you should not ask question like, when you set your altimeter, now you take off from cold weather to warm weather on the mountains, where the density altitudes is changed and the wind shear, there is a wind shear and there's a gust, so how your altimeter is going to read. So a student will get lost again and confused. So you should ask specific question. You should not ask trick question, because as an instructor you should respect student knowledge. Student shouldn't feel that you're trying to provoke him or ask him or intimidate him by getting in battle with him, because as an instructor probably you know more than him. In some areas he probably know better than you, but you don't want to get into a trick question or battle with the student. Also, you should not ask irrelevant questions. Suppose you are doing slow flight or power off stalls, and during that you shouldn't ask how the magnetos work. That's irrelevant. That's not going to help what they're doing now. So those are the oral assessment. And also, when student asks you question, when you answer student question, make sure you understand the question completely. Make sure you show interest in answering student, and answer as correctly and directly possible. After you answer, ask student, is he satisfied with the answer? For some reason, if you don't know the answer, you can be honest that I'll read and research and I'll come back to you, because we always learning. And if you bluff that time just to keep your image or false image, student will know that, and then he will lose trust in you. Now we talk about critic. What critic is? Critic doesn't have to be negative. It can be positive and negative. So critic helps us and student again, so to do better, for student to do better. So critic can be done in private or in front of other class if student is comfortable, but we don't want to let student down. Don't make him uncomfortable. So the FSC, there are different ways you can do critic. You can do critic as an instructor. You can do critic. There are many students. So any student of the class, you can welcome him to do the critic. You can do a small group critic. If there is a group of students, we can put the student in small group, and we can ask them, each group, to do specific areas of the task and do the critic. So combinedly it will be a good outcome. A lot of people working on that critic. It's again a group help, so it can help one student, your student who has performed this job, and other members of the class. There is also student-led critic. That means you pick a student and you make him the group of the leader of the group, and ask him to do the critic for the student. And he might not do it well, but he'll welcome question from the group of the member and help from the other group, and that's how you can do the critic. Also, you can ask one individual student do the whole critic. Again, he needs your help because he might not be perfect, but that will encourage him to raise his bar, to be more alert, he should be more he would want to learn more and more excited to learn the same task and do it better next time. It will encourage him to pay attention to certain tasks. Then there would be a self-critic. It's the student performed and him himself critics his own performance. He can put out of 5 how much you grade, or what was the specific what you did wrong, or you think you didn't do good. Okay. Another way of critic is written critic. Written critic is you can do it, or your student can do it for himself. You can put a lot of thoughts, take little time, and write down the critic. When you write, the critic is written, you can use that as a reference for future. So you can tell, hey, student, that this is how you felt about your steep done last month, and here you stand this month. So how you feel about it? So you have reference to go back and forth. But FS is when you do written critic, that's only helping this particular student and not the other members of the class. So that's just a limitation. So we did assessment. We spoke about assessment and the effective assessment. We spoke about the authentic assessment, traditional assessment. We spoke about collaborative assessment, oral assessment, and the critic. There are different types of critic: instructor student critic, student led critic, small group critic, individual student critic, self critic, and written critic. Hopefully it helped you, and hopefully then now you can go and read chapter 5 of Aviation Instructor Handbook and make a lesson. Have a good day. Thank you.